So it turns out I was wrong about the exploding frog. For those who haven't seen my review of the MiniFreak, I focused more on the features and components of the Mini that would give me more classic analog sounds and kind of shied away from some of the more quirky bits. But after spending even more time with the Mini, I had a realization that I completely missed for the review, so I wanted to spend a little more time talking about it. I'm Donald Jordan for Bloom Music, and today we're looking at the MiniFreak's low-key synth superpower, Polyphonic effects. The idea that oscillator slot 2 could be used as an effect was already cool, but then I had the kind of duh realization that this slot is pre-filter, which means it is per voice. Check out this simple architecture diagram to see what I mean. Usually synth effects are post-filter master effects that your total signal gets routed through just before the output. But when using the oscillator slot 2 effects on the MiniFreak, each voice goes through its own independent effect. Basically, there is a unique instance of the effect per voice. So what does this mean? Well, it's a very big deal. Polyphonic effects are incredibly rare in synthesizers. When you have polyphonic effects, the parameters of each voice's effect instance can be modulated independently. It's an uncommon concept and kind of confusing to wrap your head around, so let's see what it can actually do for us in practice. So here I've got an initialized patch, and I'm going to switch oscillator 2 to an effect. I'm going to skip over the typical filters since we're already used to hearing those polyphonically, and I'm going to start with the phaser. I'm going to kick off a little MIDI clip here to keep my hands free. And now, like all the algorithms, I've got 3 control parameters, and for the phaser, those are cutoff, feedback, and poles. Now, as I adjust these parameters with the knobs, it sounds no different than if this was a monophonic effect, as I'm essentially adjusting the parameters for all 6 instances of the effect simultaneously. This is the same as if you turn the cutoff knob on your filter. Even though there are 6 filters in the synth, 1 per voice, this single knob controls them all at once. It's not until you introduce some modulation that you start to hear the filters move independently. The same is true of our oscillator slot effects. Until you introduce some per voice modulation, you'd never even know they were polyphonic. So let's hear what this sounds like with the phaser. I like the sound of tweaking this first knob, that sounds cool, but I want that movement to be happening independently for each voice. So let's jump over to our modulation matrix and assign an envelope to the phaser cutoff, dial in the depth, and now you can hear that each voice has its own modulation curve on the phaser. So again, you've got 6 instances of the phaser, 1 for each voice, all being modulated independently. And the reason this is so exciting is it just adds a whole nother dimension to your sound design potential. On top of the kinds of things you'd normally do to get movement with your filter and oscillators, you've got a whole nother layer of possibilities for really dramatic and dynamic patch design. So before I give some final thoughts, let's hear how we can use these polyphonic effects in a couple patch examples. First, I've got this kind of electric piano type sound. In oscillator slot 1, I'm using the harmonic algorithm because I wanted this nice clean triangle wave that I can push into the wave folder of the exploding frog effect in oscillator slot 2. You can hear that the low notes are very mellow and smooth, without much attack transient. while the higher notes have some bite on the attack of the note. Let's kick off another clip, and then hop over to the modulation matrix and see what's going on here. First, I've got custom slot 1 assigned to the wave parameter of the exploding frog, which in this case is the wave folder. Then I'm affecting the depth of the cycling envelope, modulating that parameter with the keyboard modulation source. So basically, the higher up the keyboard the note is, the deeper the envelope affects the wave folder, and the more aggressive of an attack we get. And you can hear these notes are overlapping and playing simultaneously, each one with its own wave folder depth. Again, these per voice differences are only possible because the exploding frog effect is polyphonic. Let's try something a little more dramatic now. Listen to the movement and depth of this patch. That's a lot of character, but it's actually a very simple patch. Just some envelope modulation of the phaser effect in slot 2. You can see the modulation in the matrix here. It's just envelope to the oscillator 2 wave parameter. It's so simple, but hear how dramatic this patch is. Now, by pulling out this single modulation, I'll zero out the envelope to phaser cutoff. Listen to how restrained this patch is now. It's still pretty, but nowhere near as alive as with that polyphonic modulation of the effect oscillator. Let's compare it. Without, fairly lifeless. I can twiddle the phaser cutoff, but it's not that exciting because this is effectively monophonic. But now I'll reload the patch, and with that polyphonic modulation, that's really awesome. So now that we can see how incredibly powerful this feature can be, I have to say that I'm disappointed Arturia didn't push it further. I mean, we get a handful of filters, the phaser, and the exploding frog. That's it. While these are cool, I'd like to see more. Think about the crazy things you could do with additional effect types in this second slot. How about a delay where the feedback is different for each note based on the velocity, so the harder you press a note, the more repeats you get? Or a reverb where the reverb tail of the notes is modulated by the keyboard parameter, so lower notes get a shorter reverb tail and higher notes get a long one? Or how about a polyphonic distortion, where the velocity determines how overdriven each individual note is? You could do some really awesome next level patch design with some more effects types in oscillator slot 2. So Arturia, if you're listening, the MiniFreak is already an insanely powerful sound design tool, but give us some more toys to play with in the oscillator effects slot, and you could make this thing truly next level.